Since the dawn of time, mankind has sought to control the elements. From Aristotle defining four basic elements as the building blocks of all creation, to Democritus, who over a century earlier came up with the framework of the atomic theory. In 1869, Russian chemist Dmitry Mendeleev, armed with a new understanding of the laws that govern matter and a near spiritual belief in the organization of the universe, published the periodic table, a monument to all of the progress that science had made. But the work wasn't finished yet. Chemists continued to build out the table, finding or creating heavier and heavier elements, ones that became increasingly unstable and dangerous, until, in the 20th century, German chemist Otto Hahn and Austrian physicist Lise Meitner stumbled onto something huge. Nuclear fission, the splitting of the atom. Suddenly, mankind had gone from denizens of the Earth to potential destroyers of the Earth. Because atoms are bound together by a very powerful force, severing that bond The legacy of Hahn's and Meitner's discovery is complex. On the one hand, nuclear power could revolutionize the world, making fossil fuels, solar power, and wind power obsolete, ushering in a new energy age. On the other hand, this discovery has caused some truly horrific disasters, some accidental, and some very much on purpose. And one larger-than-life aspect of this legacy is Godzilla, a fictional monster who embodies the destruction caused by the bombs dropped over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I don't mean to belittle the tragedies of World War II by comparing it to a fictional story. The director of Godzilla himself said that he designed the monster to be an unstoppable force, mirroring the absolute impotence that the people of Japan felt during August of 1945. But that raises a question. Is Godzilla truly unstoppable? He's been terrorizing Japan for over half a century now, so we have to ask, can he be put down for good? And if so, how? Welcome to Singularity. 1954's Godzilla is one of the most influential movies of all time, inspiring a dynasty of sequels ranging from genuinely heartwarming human stories about coping with disasters to a latchkey kid dreaming about baby Godzilla fighting a bully kaiju who may or may not be named after Che Guevara. Godzilla films, like most tokusatsu films, tend to get a little goofy, and that's part of the charm. Nothing brings a little smile to my face like seeing King Kong shoving a tree down Godzilla's throat. But the first movie was different. It was a grim and haunting epic. The movie opens with the stories of several boats being destroyed near Odo Island. Reporters land on the island to investigate, but a devastating storm comes, destroying the helicopter and stranding the reporters right before a huge monster attacks the village. From there, the Japanese government discovers the force of destruction that is Godzilla. Armed with his atomic breath, Godzilla rampages through Tokyo, destroying everything in his path without prejudice. The Japanese government throws everything that they can at him, but nothing works. It's revealed over the course of the movie that Godzilla is an ancient sea creature who was disturbed by undersea hydrogen bomb testing and rose from the depths to punish the people of Earth. Eventually, Godzilla is defeated by a weapon called the Oxygen Destroyer that disintegrates oxygen atoms and causes the creature to suffocate from lack of breathable air. The inventor of the weapon, Daisuke Serizawa, is hesitant to use it because if the governments of the world know that it exists, they'll demand that he make more. In the end, Serizawa activates the Oxygen Destroyer and then cuts his own air supply, so that the secret of the weapon will die alongside him. Godzilla shrieks in agony and sinks into the water as his body disintegrates, with the scientist warning as the movie closes that if mankind continues to develop bigger and more destructive nuclear weapons, another Godzilla may rise to stop them. Already, you can probably see that this movie is a lot more serious than most of the later entries in the Godzilla canon. Takeo Murata and Ishiro Honda weren't exactly subtle in making Godzilla an analog for nuclear destruction. He's indiscriminate, destroying hospitals and shelters just as readily as government buildings and military ships. Some survivors deal with radiation sickness due to the intense radioactivity that Godzilla gives off. For Ghidorah's sake, his most iconic attack is his atomic breath. And of course, there's the Oxygen Destroyer, an incredibly powerful weapon that Serizawa would rather die than release to the governments of the world, mirroring the guilt and agony that many scientists felt after seeing how the nuclear bombs were used. In later movies, Godzilla takes on a more superhero-like role as the defender of Japan, but in the beginning, he was clearly intended to be dangerous and villainous. To really hammer this home, check out Mothra vs. Godzilla, the fourth Godzilla movie. Mothra was a pre-existing kaiju, debuting in her own movie 3 years before crossing over with Godzilla. She was seen as a protective and heroic monster. In a scrapped movie, Mothra vs. Bagan, she was explicitly called out as the god of peace. So Mothra vs. Godzilla is an embodiment of nuclear holocaust and absolute destructive force, picking a fight with the protector of life and god of peace. It's not exactly subtle, is it? But can you blame them? Fat Man and Little Boy are the two most powerful and destructive weapons ever deployed in war. Let's take a minute to talk scale. 1 joule is about the energy it takes to lift an apple 1 meter. 10 joules, then, is about what you need to toss an apple across a room. It takes about 100 joules to throw a 90-mile-per-hour fastball. 1,000 joules, or 1 kilojoule, is the kinetic energy of an M16 rifle. 100 kilojoules is the energy of a car moving at highway speed. 1,000 kilojoules is the energy released by exploding 1 kilogram of TNT. 100 kilograms of TNT is equivalent to the energy of a 55-ton airplane landing, while 1,000 kilograms of TNT is the energy in a lightning bolt, or a full ton of TNT. 10 tons is the energy consumed by the average US automobile in an entire year, and 100 tons of TNT is equivalent to the energy needed to throw a lightning-speed fastball. Multiply that by 10 and you have a kiloton of TNT, and the Fat Man, the bomb detonated over Nagasaki, had the equivalent yield of 21 kilotons of TNT. That is 4.184 terajoules of energy, or 4,184,000,000,000,000,000 joules. It's the equivalent energy of 21,000 bolts of lightning, or a car crash happening at 167,000 miles per hour, in a single explosion. These are numbers so huge that it's hard to wrap our minds around them. That is a level of destruction far outpacing anything mankind has ever been capable of before. And we have more powerful bombs now. The Tsar Bomba, the most powerful nuclear weapon ever detonated, was 2,500 times more powerful than Fat Man. If Godzilla really is meant to be an embodiment of nuclear weaponry, Murata and Honda were right on the money. He is unstoppable. He's more powerful than anything mankind has ever created. But I'm here to tell you that there's a weakness, a chink in the armor. Godzilla can be stopped. Maybe. Godzilla's biology has always been a bit flimsy, but in 1995's Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, we're given the bombshell that Godzilla's heart is a functioning nuclear reactor. This is reinforced in 2016's Shin Godzilla, which confirms for us that Godzilla is sustained by controlled internal nuclear fission, the splitting of the atom. It should be mentioned that these two movies are set in two completely different continuities, but it gives us confidence that across most, if not all versions of the monster, he's powered by nuclear energy. And that makes sense if you think about it. Godzilla would need a truly massive amount of energy to function on a day-to-day basis. 215 million calories according to CERN. Not to mention his absurd healing abilities and his atomic breath. He's just venting the energy that his body is always naturally producing, similar to an electric eel. When Godzilla comes to town, it's the destructive equivalent of a walking nuclear meltdown, Chernobyl on wheels. So to stop Godzilla, we have to ask, how do you stop a nuclear meltdown? We've talked a lot so far about the effects of nuclear fission, but haven't spent much time on the chemistry of what's actually happening. See, uranium is a big atom with over 200 protons and neutrons crammed into its core. It's already really unstable, so if you shoot a neutron at the nucleus hard enough, that core has a good chance of exploding, shooting out more neutrons that hit more overstuffed uranium atoms, causing more explosions in a chain reaction. So if nuclear fission is powered by stray neutrons, the best way to put a halt to it is to introduce an element that can safely gobble up those neutrons without splitting apart. Nuclear generator stations like to use control rods, bars of metal that they inject into the core to safely absorb those neutrons, essentially putting a halt to the chain reaction before it hits the point of no return. These are made out of a variety of elements like boron, silver, hafnium, indium, or cadmium. And cadmium is an interesting one, because it has an important role in the Godzilla lore. The return of Godzilla was a game changer for the franchise, rebooting the series and erasing every movie from official canon except the original, 14 films in all. It was a fresh start, and most people would agree that it was a success, scoring better reviews than the films that came before or after it. Although I really do like Godzilla vs. Biollante. No one would say that it's a perfect movie, it honestly probably doesn't even make my top 5, but it was a good watch. It wiped the slate clean of all the development Godzilla had gotten and returned him to his roots. An unstoppable nuclear monster rampaging through the streets of Tokyo. This was actually one of the first movies to lay the groundwork for the living nuclear reactor theory. And how do they end up defeating Godzilla here? With cadmium shells launched directly into his mouth, acting as control rod. If Godzilla is sustained by constant nuclear reactions, essentially a million chain reactions happening at the same time, then enough control rod material can gobble up all of those neutrons and put a stop to it permanently. So problem solved, right? By using enough of these metals as control rods or some equivalent neutron sink, we should be able to stop Godzilla in his track, right? Well, maybe. But there's more to the story here. If we peel back another layer, we'll see that just like uranium and plutonium, Japan actually has a long and tragic history with cadmium. In the early 20th century, residents of the Toyama prefecture along the Jinzu River began noticing some troubling health problems. Severe pains, kidney failure, skeletal damage. There are records of doctors inadvertently breaking patients' wrists just trying to take their blood pressure because their bones had gotten so weak. And the scariest part was, no one had any idea what was causing it. But we do now. Upriver was the Kamioka mines, at the time one of the most productive mines in the world, and as part of their operation, a whole lot of cadmium was running off into the Jinzu River. Cadmium is a nasty element that can play some really dirty tricks. It's a bit of a changeling, able to evict the zinc, calcium, and sulfur in your body by tricking your natural defenses into misidentifying it. Because of this, it'll sneak into your body and pool up in kidneys and bones where the zinc and calcium would normally go. The problem is, it's a lot bigger and bulkier than the elements that it impersonates, and it can't fill the roles that they do in the body, leading to kidney failure and bone softening. Even worse, it's a stubborn element and can't easily be flushed out of the body once it's in there. With the cadmium in the river soaking into the rice that the Toyama citizens were growing, cadmium poisoning spread, eventually coming to be known as itai-itai, the ouch-ouch disease, because of how painful it was. It's possible that the writers of The Return of Godzilla were familiar with the idea and chemistry of control rods, but I can't help but notice that a monster who was born through one periodic table tragedy in Japanese history was eventually defeated through an element closely associated with another one. Mankind has always sought to control the elements. Sometimes, like in the cases of cadmium, uranium, and plutonium, these attempts go terribly wrong. Godzilla is a warning against that, a reminder of our hubris. Maybe it's even further hubris that instead of taking the warning, we're trying to find a way to charge through. But are we asking the right question? In 2017 and 2018, the trilogy of CG animated Godzilla movies came out. They're actually pretty good, even if it takes a little bit for the characters to really develop. By the end of the third movie, Godzilla the Planet Eater, the people of Earth start learning to live alongside Godzilla, treating him like a natural disaster, a tsunami, an earthquake, or a hurricane. A phenomenon to be defended against, but not necessarily stopped or defeated. Control rods may work to prevent the bulk of the destruction, but Godzilla always comes back. Because he's not really a villain. He's a force of nature. In 1956, Japanese-American nuclear chemist Paul Kuroda theorized about natural nuclear fission reactors. Essentially, a specific set of circumstances that would allow for self-sustained uranium chain reactions completely naturally. It was thought to be impossible. That is until 1972, when a site in Central Africa called Oklo was found to have some really unique nuclear isotopes in its soil. Isotopes perfectly consistent with Kuroda's predictions, pointing to a piecemeal chain reaction that could have been sustained for tens or even hundreds of thousands of years. This is actual nuclear fission taking place completely naturally, long before mankind had ever dreamt it up. Before Hahn and Meitner and Mendeleev and Einstein and Oppenheimer and Szilard and Democritus and Aristotle and all the others, a lot of people like to talk about nuclear weaponry like we opened Pandora's box. And in some ways we did. But it's also worth acknowledging that radiation, even devastating chain reactions, are a quirk of nature. A side effect of the laws of physics that bind our entire universe. The same laws of physics that scientists across the globe and throughout history have devoted their lives to uncovering. It's a force of nature, something that we can live alongside. It can be used for terrible destruction, but it can also be a clean energy source, something to improve lives across the world. It's not inherently good or evil, but it has the potential for both. And just like any other resource, it's our decision what we do with it. This is Singularity, and remember to stay curious.